Driver error is the #1 cause of combat vehicle accidents during operation. Even the safest vehicles and the best road conditions will not offset the danger of poorly trained drivers. This lesson on varied terrain driving for track vehicles will show you the correct procedures to use for the M1 Abrams as well as for the M60 series tank. You should have a pencil and paper on which to write answers to questions as you go through the lesson. No mistakes will be allowed due to the extreme seriousness of this task. Remember, the safety of the crew and the vehicle is at stake. You have learned to drive over relatively smooth land, but such terrain is not always the situation. Therefore, it is necessary that you learn to drive over obstacles, up and down hills, across ditches, and in heavy dust, sand, or mud, as well as snow and ice. Remember, the procedures taught in this lesson will apply to the M1 Abrams tank as well as the M60 series tanks. Such obstacles as stone walls, shelves of rock on a hillside, and similar terrain features cause difficulties in driving unless you learn to deal with them. To prevent personnel injury or track and suspension damage, cross obstacles slowly. First, the TC must alert the crew that an obstacle will be crossed and the main gun must be elevated or traversed to prevent contact with the obstacle. Set the transmission control to L, low. Then, slowly drive the tank to meet the forward edge of the obstacle. Now, increase speed to drive up the obstacle, and once again slow down as the tank gets to its balance point. Slowly drive forward to ease the tank from its balance point, and drive off the obstacle using the service brakes to control the tank's speed. Once the tracks touch the ground, increase speed until the rear of the tank is off the obstacle. Once the tank has cleared the obstacle, continue normal driving. Answer the questions on the procedures for driving over obstacles. When you have finished answering, restart the tape for the correct answer. When a tank must cross an obstacle, what is the first thing the driver must do to prevent personnel injury or equipment damage? Write your answer. Stop the tape. To cross an obstacle, the driver must slow the tank to a safe speed. The crew has been alerted that an obstacle will be crossed. What is the correct position of the gun tube? Stop the tape. You should have answered that the gun tube would be elevated or traversed to prevent contact with the obstacle. Briefly describe the driving procedure for approaching and driving over an obstacle. Stop the tape. With the transmission in low, slowly drive the tank to meet the forward edge of the obstacle. Then increase the speed to drive up the obstacle. Slow the tank as it gets to its balance point, and slowly drive it forward to ease the tank from the balance point. Slowly drive off the obstacle using the service brakes to control the speed of the tank. Once the tracks touch the ground, increase speed until the rear of the tank is off the obstacle. Once the tank has cleared the obstacle, resume normal driving. Let's continue. To drive a tracked vehicle up a hill, choose a straight course. Steering reduces the power delivered to the tracks and will make it harder for the tank to climb the grade. If a forward speed in a higher gear cannot be maintained, set the transmission control to L, low. Use the service brake to stop the tank on the top of the hill. Then, if possible, drive straight down the hill. Use the service brakes to control the tank's speed. A shift from drive to low will not slow or stop the tank. If the engine stops while the tank is moving, perform immediate action for the loss of engine power. First, notify the tank commander that the engine has lost power. Try to steer the tank to a clear, level area before the speed drops below 5 kilometers or 3 miles per hour. If you wait until the tank drops below this speed, steering and service brakes are inoperable. The parking brake must be used to stop the tank. Next, set the transmission control to N, neutral, and notify unit maintenance on a DA form 2404. When you drive an M60A3 tank down a hill, use low gear. Do not have the shift lever in neutral, and do not shift from neutral to low or high unless the engine is at an idle speed of 700 to 750 RPM. Remember that the tank must be at a complete stop before using reverse gear. For maximum engine braking power, use reverse for moving rearward and descending steep grades. The steering procedure is reversed when the transmission is in reverse range. Try a few questions on driving up and down hills. Write your answers on a piece of paper. Stop the tape after each question. Why is it best to choose a straight course when driving up a hill? It's best to choose a straight course because steering reduces the power delivered to the tracks and makes it more difficult for the tank to climb the grade. What gear and brakes should you use to maintain better control of the tank? To maintain better control of the vehicle, use low gear and the service brake. The tank has lost power and you've notified the tank commander. List the procedures you will go through for loss of engine power. Stop the tape. First, try to steer the tank to a clear, flat area before the speed drops below 3 miles an hour. Next, use the parking brake to stop the tank and set the transmission to neutral. Next, fill out a DA form 2404 to notify unit maintenance. The procedures for driving down a hill are different if you're driving an M60A3 tank. Which gear should be used? Stop the tape. You should have answered that you'd use low gear. You would not shift from neutral to high or low gear unless the engine is at idle speed or what RPM? Don't shift from neutral to high or low unless the engine is at an idle speed of 700 to 750 RPM. If the tank is descending a steep hill, which gear must be used for maximum engine braking power? Stop the tape. For maximum braking power, use reverse. When descending a steep hill, what caution must you observe? Stop the tape. The steering procedure is reversed when the transmission is in reverse range. Let's move on. The M1 can cross a ditch up to 9 feet wide if the edges of the ditch are firm. If the edges of the ditch are soft or sandy, the width that can be crossed will be less. When driving over terrain that has ditches to be crossed, drive slowly to prevent personnel injury or track and suspension damage. First, the crew must be alerted that a ditch will be crossed. The main gun must be elevated or traversed so that it will clear the ditch. Remember, the same procedures are used with the M60 series tanks as with the M1 tank. Set the transmission control to L, low, and slowly drive the tank to meet the ditch with both tracks at the edge of the ditch. Slowly drive into the ditch. When the front of the tracks touch the far side of the ditch, increase speed. When the tank gets to its balance point, slow down and drive forward to ease the tank from the balance point. When the front of the tank touches the ground, drive normally. Stop the tape and answer the questions on the procedure for driving over ditches. When you have finished answering each question, restart the tape for the correct answer. If the sides of a ditch are firm, what width can an M1 tank cross? The M1 can cross a ditch that is up to 9 feet wide. In which position should the main gun be to cross a ditch? When the tank crosses a ditch, the main gun should be traversed or elevated. Use which gear to drive into a ditch? Use low gear to drive into a ditch. You have slowly driven the tank into the ditch. What must you do when the tracks touch the far side of the ditch? When the tracks touch the far side of a ditch, increase speed. Perform what procedures once the tank has reached its balance point? Slow the tank until the front of the track touches the ground, then continue normal driving. Let's move on to the next scenario, which is driving in extreme dust. In this situation, keep a close watch on all driver's panels for caution and warning lights to be sure the dust does not affect the tank's equipment. When traveling or moving in a convoy, there should be at least 100 meters between the tanks, and the tank should operate at low engine speed. The principles of driving in sand are the same as driving in mud. However, the best time to drive on sand is at night or early morning when it is damp. Damp sand provides better traction for the tank. The tank should never straddle sand mounds or drive on the sides of two mounds. Loose sand will not support the tank on steep slopes. Have your pencil and paper ready to answer a few questions on driving in extreme dust and sand. When you are driving in extreme dust, why must you keep a close watch on the driver's panel? You watch for caution lights to be sure the dust is not affecting the tank's equipment. What speed and distance is safe between tanks in a convoy? Use a slow speed and maintain at least 100 meters between tanks. What is the best time of day to drive on sand? Why? It is best to drive on sand in the early morning or at night because the sand is damp and the tank will have better traction. Why should a tank avoid straddling or driving on the sides of sand mounds? Because the loose sand will not support the tank. Let's continue. There may be situations in which you will be required to drive in the mud. When driving in mud, do not spin the tracks to start the tank moving or make pivot turns. Keep the throttle hand grip steady after the tank has reached the desired speed. On loose sand or mud, turn the tank slowly and steer straight up and down hills if possible. If your tank is in mud that's 12 inches or deeper and you need to move forward or turn after the tank has stopped, go through the following procedure. First, set the transmission control to R, reverse. Turn the throttle hand grips back and move the tank straight back about 20 feet. Press down on the service brake pedal and twist the throttle hand grips forward to the idle position. Set the transmission control to L, low. Turn the throttle hand grips back and move the tank forward. If the tank must be turned in deep mud, do so slowly. The driver should be aware of a lack of steering response, which indicates a buildup of mud or sand between the rear sprockets and the track. If the buildup is allowed to continue, it will force the track off. This is often accompanied by a popping sound. If a popping sound is heard and does not stop, do the following. Press on the service brake to stop the tank, and press the parking brake foot pedal. Set the transmission control to N, neutral. Dismount the tank and check the tracks for buildup of mud or sand. If you see the track has more mud than normal, drive it backward and forward about 15 feet 2 or 3 times to clean the track and suspension. If the tank starts to skid in the mud, turn the throttle hand grips forward to the idle position and steer in the direction of the skid until the tank stops. Slowly turn the hand grips back to steer the tank in a straight course. Use your pencil and paper to answer questions on driving in the mud. List the procedures you must perform when a tank is stopped in deep mud and you need to turn it. Stop the tape. First, make sure the transmission is in reverse. Then, turn the throttle hand grips back and move the tank straight back about 20 feet. Next, press on the service brake pedal and twist the throttle hand grips forward to the idle position. Set the transmission control to low. Turn the throttle hand grips back and move the tank forward. What does a popping sound indicate while driving in deep mud? A popping sound indicates a buildup of mud between the rear sprocket and track. List the procedure you would go through if the popping sound does not stop. Stop the tank by pressing on the service brake and the parking brake. Then set the transmission control to neutral. Dismount the tank and check for mud buildup. If there is excessive mud on the tracks, move the tank forward and backward 15 feet, 2 or 3 times to clean the track. List the steps for controlling a tank that starts to skid in the mud. First, turn the throttle hand grips forward to the idle position and steer in the direction of the skid until the tank stops. Slowly turn the hand grips back and steer the tank in a straight course. Let's move on to a different situation. Driving in extreme cold or snow is almost the same as driving in mud. In Arctic temperatures, transmission oil must be allowed to warm up before driving the tank. The tank should be driven in low range for about 100 yards before moving out. This will give the oil in the drivetrain and suspension time to warm up. After the oil has warmed up and you're ready to move out, turn the throttle hand grip slowly to change speed. Keep the throttle hand grip steady after the tank reaches the desired speed. When on a slippery, icy surface, turn the tank very slowly and steer away from ruts and large snowbanks. Steer the tank straight up and down hills, if possible. If the tank starts to slide or skid, turn the throttle hand grips forward to the idle position and steer the tank in the direction of the skid until it stops skidding. Next, turn the throttle hand grips slowly back and steer the tank on a straight course. If more traction is needed, turn the throttle hand grips forward so the tank slows to 15 kilometers or 9 miles per hour or less, and set the transmission control to L, low. If the tank breaks through heavily crusted snow, turn the throttle hand grips forward to the idle position and set the transmission control to L, low, after the tank slows to 15 kilometers or 9 miles per hour or less. Slowly turn the throttle back so the tank moves at the slowest possible speed without stopping. Try to drive the tank back onto the snow crust. Use your pencil and paper to answer questions about driving in extreme cold or snow. The transmission oil has warmed up and you're holding the throttle hand grip steady. How will you approach any ruts, snowbanks, or hills? Try to avoid any ruts or snowbanks and steer the tank straight on hills. How do you handle a skid? Turn the throttle hand grips forward to idle position and steer in the direction of the skid until the tank stops skidding. Slowly turn the throttle hand grips back and steer the tank on a straight course. What must you do if more traction is needed? To improve traction, turn the throttle hand grips forward so the tank slows to 15 kilometers or 9 miles per hour or less, then set the transmission control to low. What must you do if the tank breaks through heavily crusted snow? First, turn the throttle hand grips forward to the idle position and set the transmission control to low after the tank slows down to 9 miles per hour or less. Next, slowly turn the throttle back so the tank moves at the slowest possible speed without stopping. Try to drive back onto the snow crust. This lesson has covered driving procedures in various terrains, up and down hills, over obstacles, across ditches, and in dust, sand, mud, ice, and snow. Many of the procedures have been the same. It is very important that you know and use these procedures and use your common sense. Do not take chances with the safety of your crew or your vehicle. With the proper driving techniques, your tank can take you almost anywhere. This concludes the lesson on varied terrain driving for tracked vehicles.